What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got our Week 13 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at alldaypigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before getting into our breakdown, a quick word from our partners at Prize Picks, which is our favorite DFS site of choice this NFL and fantasy football season. If you guys aren't familiar with them, do yourself a favor and check them out. In fact, when you sign up right now and use code ADP, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And look, we're already doing all this research for fantasy football matchups. So why not take advantage of it and get some profits as well? Prize Picks, well, they allow you to basically do exactly that. They have so many different player prop bets, not only in terms of single stat DFS, but also in terms of fantasy score. And you can combine them any which way you want. Super simple, super easy to use. All you have to do, choose two more players from the board, and then just pick the over-under on their projected fantasy score or on their single stat. Again, pretty much for every single matchup as the week progresses, those options will be updated even more so. And then the great thing is you've got two different options in terms of how you want to bet it, whether it's a flex play, so that way you can miss one of your selections but still win. Obviously, that's the safer choice. Or if you want more bang for your buck, check out the power play, where if you get all your picks correct, well, you win even bigger. So again, check all of that out. Details in the description. And we kick off Week 13 on Thursday night with the Cowboys at the Saints here. And a couple of big names from the Cowboys side of things, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, who didn't play last week, both are expected to suit up on Thursday. And in this scenario, look, even though Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson both stepped in huge for the Cowboys in Week 12, I had both of them as starts. They did not disappoint. Now they're going to go back to that secondary/tertiary role for the Cowboys offensively. And that's why it's a little bit, I think, risky to start either one of them here. If there's any one of these guys, potentially Gallup or Wilson, that you're going to take a chance on, in addition to CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, who are the two primaries here, it probably would be Gallup. You know, I could see a scenario where Amari Cooper maybe isn't quite at 100%, obviously coming back from COVID, but, you know, on the flip side, he has had almost 2 weeks now to kind of get back into shape, etc. So it'll be interesting to see. But more than anything, also, the Cowboys have come out and said that they're going to feature Ezekiel Elliott pretty heavily in this game. Now, obviously, coaches say that, teams say that. It doesn't translate 100%. But basically, it shows that the Cowboys' rushing attack isn't going anywhere, especially, I think, in a game like this versus the Saints, who are all types of beat up at the quarterback position. And in my opinion, you're going to have a tough time hanging versus upper echelon offenses like the Cowboys can be. So for that reason, it's tough for me to trust a guy like a Gallup or a Cedric Wilson. But looking at the Saints side of it here, well, New Orleans actually might be undergoing a quarterback change, going with Taysom Hill. Now, how does that affect this wide receiver room? Honestly, I don't think it affects it all that much, whether it was Simeon, whether it was Jameis Winston before he got hurt, or now potentially Taysom Hill. I don't really trust this wide receiver room. Like, without, a true number one guy, I don't have faith in Deontay Harris and Traquan Smith or Marquez Callaway, who are going to be the top three options. Like, it was Michael Thomas in that. Once he got declared out for the season, I think that's all she wrote for the wide receivers in New Orleans. It's pretty much the running backs there or bust, i.e. Alvin Kamara or Mark Ingram. So for that reason, I am fading these three wide receivers. Moving on, we've got the Colts at the Texans. Only really a couple names to touch on here for Indianapolis. Michael Pittman. Last week he was peppered with targets, and I think that will continue to be the case. He by far is the number one wide receiver on this offense. Now, I will say the game script here probably won't be the best one in terms of a heavy passing attack for the Colts. So I would temper the expectations. But at the same time, I'm not going to go and sit Michael Pittman. Some of you might say, well, what about T.Y. Hilton? The guy has been historically in his career absolutely sensational versus the Texans, and I understand that. But I'm not going to just based off of that one thing throw in T.Y. Hilton, who's obviously, I think, in my opinion, past his prime in a matchup where probably the Colts are going to be very run heavy, and he's the number 2 option. Maybe you can even argue number 3 option behind some tight ends there offensively. So for that reason, I would sit him here. And then for the Texans, it continues to be Brandon Cooks, but we've kind of just had to adjust the expectations for Brandon Cooks throughout the season. I think offensively, the Texans were kind of overachieving the first couple of weeks of the season. And now we kind of see where Brandon Cooks is a guy that is quarterback dependent, unfortunately, for the Texans. These guys are struggling, whether it's Tyrod Taylor or, whatever option you have got there. But I still think Cooks is the top choice, whichever way you cut it, whichever way you look at it. Probably more so just because of the lack of passing volume. A standard option, a little bit touchdown dependent, kind of in that low end wide receiver 2 range, but he has tremendous upside nonetheless. Moving on, we've got the Vikings at the Lions. I'm only interested in the Vikings side of things here. Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, that kind of goes without saying, even though this Lions defense probably can definitely be had on the ground. Now, Dalvin Cook isn't expected to play, so Alexander Madison has had success before, so I'm not too worried about that. And from the same side of it, I still think Jefferson and Thielen will be able to eat versus this Lions defense. So again, I think both these guys probably high-end wide receiver 2s. For the Lions, it's kind of a completely different situation. I don't trust any of these wide receivers. Now, for what it's worth, I think Josh Reynolds has the highest upside currently, just primarily because he's the most experienced wide receiver. He has that previous connection with Jared Goff, but it's not all that much upside. Yes, this Vikings defense, again, can be had, but offensively, the Lions, they're tough to watch. Now, maybe this is the week where one of these wide receivers breaks out because DeAndre Swift probably not expected to play. If he does somehow end up playing, we know that even at the running back position, he's going to be heavily targeted as a pass catcher. I don't think Jamal Williams quite has the same pass catching upside, so we'll see. But either way, I think you're getting too cute here if you're putting all your eggs in one basket with one of these wide receivers. Yes, Reynolds had a touchdown last week, but again, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the yards, the targets, the receptions, not all that impressive. So I would be fading the Detroit trio here. Afterwards, Giants at the Dolphins. For the Giants, it's pretty much become a situation where, who's healthy at the wide receiver position? Like, if Sterling Shepard is healthy, he is the most, kind of trustworthy option there. But, just like in years prior, Shepard has struggled with injuries this season. There's no for sure that he plays. And honestly, I'd probably call it a long shot at this point in time. If he plays, I'm not bothering with any of these other wide receivers. If he doesn't, I think this is the pecking order. Kadarius Toney, then Kenny Golladay. But Kadarius Toney also banged up. So then it kind of becomes, Kenny Golladay. So yes, I do currently have Kenny Golladay as a sit, but if Shepard and Toney both are out, then Kenny Golladay, I do think, is going to see some volume and can be decent in a standard play as much as, he has struggled and is disappointed this season. At some point in time, when there's nobody else around you, you're going to get those opportunities. And in fact, I actually think a guy like a Jalen Waddle is an example of that. I mean, to be fair, Jalen Waddle has been great pretty much since the start of the season. And, the upside probably a lot higher than, the remaining healthy wide receivers for the New York Giants, but he was absolutely sensational last week with Will Fuller and Devontae Parker, still out. We'll see. I don't anticipate those guys returning this week. You continue to put out Jalen Waddle. He has high-end wide receiver 2 upside, especially in PPR formats with the amount of volume he is getting. Okay, if Devontae Parker comes back, something like that, it's still lessened, but I would still roll out Jalen Waddle in that scenario. Then Bucks at the Falcons. I'll go with the trio of the Bucs. I've had these three names here for a while. I continue to have an asterisk next to Antonio Brown's name because we still don't know when he's going to come back, whether it's going to be this week, next week. But, I don't want him to become a forgotten name because he is somebody that is definitely capable, and especially in a matchup like this that I think is very favorable for the Bucs offensively and what they want to do. Yes, last week was the Leonard Fournette week. I mean, for God's sakes, 4 touchdowns. Are you kidding me? Didn't let anyone else really eat all that much. I think we're going to see these guys return to form and have success. Evans, Godwin at least for sure. AB potentially too if he plays. I think all these guys are in the wide receiver 2 range because, again, the Bucs probably will still focus on the rushing attack here versus an opponent like the Falcons. Speaking of Atlanta, Cordero Patterson back. I said last week if Patterson returned, Russell Gage would be primarily the only wide receiver that you want to start, and that paid off. And I think that's going to be the case again here versus the Bucs. There's still Kyle Pitts there, Zacchaeus as well, but I'm not getting cute with him there. Pitts obviously at the tight end position, but I think honestly, as long as teams kind of double team him, and then also when you factor in some of those rookie struggles, Russell Gage kind of becomes just that clear number 2 option on this team after a Cordero Patterson since Calvin Ridley isn't available. So I wouldn't mind starting Russell Gage as a low-end wide receiver 2 here in week 13. Then Eagles at the Jets. This one's a little bit interesting. I will say this. Obviously, Devonta Smith, you start him. But the reason I say it's interesting for the Eagles at least is because maybe Jalen Hurts doesn't play. He kind of banged up his ankle this last week. And due to that, is somebody like a Gardner Minshew going to get a start here for the Eagles? And if that happens, are some other wide receivers going to get incorporated? But honestly, even if that's the case, I still don't have enough faith in this wide receiver core for the Eagles. So I'm sticking to Devonta Smith. And then for the Jets, if Corey Davis plays, okay, I'll go with him. But otherwise, it's kind of been Elijah Moore. I will say, though, kind of like we predicted last week with Zach Wilson under center, the ceiling was definitely lessened for this offense in terms of the pass catching upside for the wide receivers, and then also for Elijah Moore, who had kind of been a little rookie darling these last couple of weeks. And I will say that will continue to be the case for the majority of the season for as long as Zach Wilson is playing. If Corey Davis does suit up, then I think Jamison Crowder is too many mouths to feed there, especially with the type of quarterback that Zach Wilson is and the type of offense the Jets have at this point in time. So Jamison Crowder is a sit in my eyes. And then, like always, not even going to bother listing the other Philadelphia wide receivers. That's how bad it is there. Moving on, Cardinals at the Bears. There is hope coming out of Arizona that this will be the week that Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins come back. And I'm sure many fantasy managers are crossing their fingers that that is the case. If Hopkins returns, I think you have to play him as a high-end wide receiver too. And then my number 2 wide receiver on this offense, since kind of Hopkins has been hurt, since Kyler Murray has been hurt, has been Christian Kirk. And I don't think that's going to necessarily change. Yes, there are boom and bust tendencies associated with Christian Kirk, but especially if Hopkins isn't 100%, I still think Kirk can have some upside here. And then for the Bears, I mean, it's been Darnell Mooney. It's kind of mind-boggling what's happened with Allen Robinson because I still think he's a very talented wide receiver. But the quarterback situation is a bad one. The offensive situation is a bad one. The head coach situation is a bad one. There's a lot of bad situations take away with the Chicago Bears at this point in time. Mooney has kind of been that lone bright spot, and I'm going to continue to trot him out as kind of a low to mid-level wide receiver too. He's been having success there. And then I'm sitting AJ Green and Rondale Moore, especially if Hopkins comes back. And then Allen Robinson. Doesn't matter where seemingly it's Justin Fields or Andy Dalton at quarterback. Robinson just isn't getting involved, a little bit banged up as well. So sitting him here. Then Chargers at the Bengals. I'll go with the duo of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Yes, the Chargers offensively were a bit disappointing this last week, but there were some opportunities there, and I do think this will be a higher scoring affair on the side of the Chargers. So I like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams as high-end wide receiver 2s on the week. For the Bengals, T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Higgins had a huge bounce back performance, kind of like how we predicted. Now, the other guys didn't quite show up. It was kind of the T. Higgins and the Joe Mixon show and the Bengals defense. But again, I think this is a game where it's going to be a bit more competitive, but I'm still only sticking to two wide receivers here, Higgins and Jamar Chase. I think they're the guys with the highest upside week in and week out. Boyd right now, I don't think this is the type of game, especially with the Chargers, who have a good secondary, where you want to trot him out and risk it there. The Chargers struggled stopping the run. Joe Mixon has been great all season long, so I could see a heavy dose of the rushing attack here for the Bengals. So I'm sticking with just Higgins and Jamar Chase, who are, I'd probably say, in the low to mid-level wide receiver 2 range, so just a step below Annan Williams. Afterwards, Jags at the Rams. I'll go with Marvin Jones, but honestly, you could convince me to not start a single Jag wide receiver here. I think this one could be a blowout. I say it every single week. Trevor Lawrence hasn't exactly played up to his standards that we expected. The head coaching situation with Urban Meyer, rumor swirling that he's leaving after this year. I think this is a tough opponent in the Rams. I think it could get out of hand quickly. I still don't believe in Laviska. Marvin Jones is kind of the most experienced guy there. I think he kind of offers the most help to Marvin Jones. And for that reason, I'm going to go with him here. But I think he is, in that low-end wide receiver 2 range, mostly a standard guy, probably more so a wide receiver 3, in fact. And then for the Rams, I'm looking at Cooper Kupp. This trio of wide receivers all had tremendous games last week. I think they can do it again. Probably not the same huge upside, but I think it's in the realm of possibility that they each get 10 points in PPR scoring, especially with Darrell Henderson a little bit banged up. So maybe there's a higher, kind of focus on the passing attack here for the Rams. But obviously Cooper Kupp is the top choice. The number 1 wide receiver in all of fantasy football. And then, Van Jefferson, I think, is slightly above Odell Beckham, but that's something that I think is going to be pretty close throughout the remainder of the season. Then Washington at the Raiders. I'm keeping it simple here. Terry McLaurin, Hunter Renfrow. These have been the 2 guys that have been starting pretty much solely all season long for Washington and for Las Vegas, respectively. Now, I will say with Darren Waller potentially, being week to week, whatever happens with his status, if he for some reason doesn't play, Edwards becomes an intriguing play, but definitely still very boom or bust. So I would just keep it simple. I would go with the reliable guy in Hunter Renfrow. I think, he has a similar type of expectation as McLaurin in this game, just because, as great as McLaurin is, and I do think he is great, Heineke is just a little bit too inconsistent offensively. Like McLaurin, for as great as he is, needs to be involved more in this offense than he is. But I think both these guys can be regarded as mid-level wide receiver 2s, because the Raiders especially, they have some other ways to kind of replace somebody like a Darren Waller, involve Kenyon Drake, involve some backup tight end options. So for that reason, if things stay the way they are, I think it would be smarter to sit Edwards, Deshaun Jackson, and then for Washington, DeAndre Carter and Curtis Samuel. Samuel has barely played this entire season. I don't really have any much faith in him. Played last week, but didn't really do much. Carter kind of intriguing, but to me, it's still just McLaurin. I don't think this offense can sustain more than 1 fantasy relevant wide receiver. Afterwards, Ravens at the Steelers. I'll go with Marquise Brown here, primarily for the Ravens. Rashad Bateman, Sammy Watkins, I have as sits. Bateman has kind of been trending a little bit more so downwards these last couple of weeks. It's kind of been the Marquise Brown, the Mark Andrews show. That makes sense, and especially here versus the Steelers, who have struggled stopping the run. I think we could see the Ravens, turn it over to Lamar on the ground, to Devonta Freeman, Latavius Murray, a situation like that. So I'm sitting Bateman and Watkins. And then for the Steelers, Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. Yes, Big Ben looks toast, but Johnson and Claypool get volume. Johnson is like, a borderline wide receiver 1. Claypool in standard formats, I think, is a solid low-end wide receiver 2. Then 49ers at the Seahawks. Not too many options here. I have everyone as a start. Notice no Deebo Samuel, who's been absolutely sensational this entire year, dealing with a groin. So kind of just Brendan Ayuk left. It's going to be a heavy dose, in my opinion. Ayuk, George Kittle, Elijah Mitchell, but Ayuk is kind of the lone man standing at wide receiver. So I think he has some mid to high end wide receiver 2 upside. For the Seahawks, yes, DK Metcalf was absolutely pretty much nowhere to be found. Only 1 catch this last week. I don't know why that was the case. I don't have any explanation for that. Anytime that happens with a guy like DK Metcalf's caliber, you have to re-examine things offensively. But I think just simply put here, even in this NFC West showdown where anything is viable to happen, Lockett and Metcalf, both low-end wide receiver 2s, mid-level wide receiver 2s, kind of in that range. And you need to understand that there are boom or bust tendencies with both of them. Then Broncos at the Chiefs. I only want to start Tyreek Hill here. He's the most reliable wide receiver by far. Now, okay, you could make the case the Chiefs' defense not all that great. The Broncos know this team well. So one of Courtland Sutton, Tim Patrick, or Jerry Jeudy is going to have a big game. And to that, I would say, okay, great. Probably. Which one? How are you going to pick one of these guys? I said it last week. I've said it before. With all these 3 guys healthy, it's too difficult to pinpoint which one is going to, be the guy to break out. And in a worst case situation like last week, like all of them are going to have like 3 targets, 2 catches. And that's absolutely awful. The rushing attack is still a focus. Noah Fant is still there. So I'm fading the 3 wide receivers for the Broncos and then Mecole Hardman as well for the Chiefs. Afterwards, Patriots at the Bills. Normally, I wouldn't endorse starting 2 wide receivers for the Patriots, but I think this could be a game where the Patriots are kind of forced to throw the football. So Jacoby Myers, that typical start for us here, a low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in PPR formats. And then Kendrick Bourne, you might say you're chasing the points. And normally I would say that as well. But again, because of what I think it's going to take for the Patriots to hang with the Bills here, I think Bourne could have a role to play. I think he's kind of that, 1A, 1B type of option for the Patriots. But similar to Myers, low-end wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. And then for the Bills, it's kind of become the Stephon Diggs show only yet again. I wouldn't get too cute here with Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders. If it's one of those 2 guys, it would be Beasley and only in PPR formats if you're really desperate. And then I'm fading Nelson Aguilar. It's not often the Patriots have 1 really reliable fantasy wide receiver, let alone 2. Forget about 3. That's why Aguilar is a sit. But with that, we wrap up our Week 13 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.